The iron bars felt like ice against Josephine Mitchell's trembling fingers as the prison wagon lurched over another rut in the dusty Kansas road. And she knew with terrible certainty that if someone did not prove her innocence before the sun touched the western horizon, she would hang at dawn for a murder she did not commit. The September afternoon heat bore down mercilessly on the covered wagon, yet Josephine could not stop shivering. Her cotton dress, once a respectable pale blue, was now stained with dirt and dried blood that was not her own. The memory of finding Thomas Whitmore's body in the bank vault haunted her with vivid clarity. She had been depositing her late mother's jewelry for safekeeping when she stumbled upon the banker sprawled across the floor, a knife protruding from his back. Her scream had brought Marshal Hendricks running, and within minutes she found herself arrested, the bloody knife somehow bearing her fingerprints alongside others that no one seemed interested in examining. "Easy now," the deputy driving the wagon called back to her. "We will be in Dodge City within the hour. Judge Carrington arrives tonight on the evening train. You will get your trial tomorrow morning." Tomorrow morning. Josephine pressed her forehead against the cold metal. She had no lawyer, no witnesses, and no hope. The evidence against her seemed damning. She had been alone with the body. Her prints were on the weapon. And worst of all, everyone in her small hometown of Cimarron knew she had argued publicly with Whitmore just 3 days earlier when he refused to extend her loan on the family farm. The wagon wheels creaked and groaned as they rolled into Dodge City proper. Josephine could hear the sounds of civilization growing louder, horses neighing, men shouting, a piano playing somewhere in the distance. Through the gaps in the wagon's wooden sides, she caught glimpses of the famous front street with its saloons and storefronts, all painted in faded colors that spoke of harsh winters and unforgiving summers. As the wagon pulled to a stop outside the jail, a crowd began to gather. Josephine heard their muttered comments, felt their curious and judgmental stares like physical blows. The deputy, a heavy-set man named Wilson, climbed down and opened the back of the wagon. His face held a mixture of duty and pity that somehow made everything worse. "Come on, miss," he said quietly, offering his hand to help her down. Josephine's legs had gone numb from sitting in the same cramped position for hours. She stumbled as she tried to step down, and would have fallen if strong hands had not caught her shoulders, steadying her with surprising gentleness. "Careful there," a deep voice said. She looked up into a pair of startlingly blue eyes set in a sun-bronzed face. The man who had caught her was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing dusty range clothes and a well-worn Stetson hat. Dark hair curled slightly at his collar, and a few days' worth of stubble shadowed his strong jaw. He looked to be in his late 20s, perhaps 30 at most, with the kind of weathered handsomeness that came from years spent under the open sky. "Thank you," Josephine managed to whisper, though her voice cracked. The cowboy's eyes searched her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. Something flickered in his expression, recognition perhaps, or maybe just surprise at finding someone so young facing such serious charges. He released her shoulders but stayed close as Deputy Wilson took her arm. "Move along, Ashton," Wilson said, though not unkindly. "This is official business." The cowboy, Ashton, nodded slowly but did not look away from Josephine. "What's she charged with?" "Murder," Wilson replied shortly. "Killed Thomas Whitmore over in Cimarron. Now step aside." "I did not do it," Josephine said, the words bursting from her before she could stop them. She looked directly at Ashton, desperate for anyone to believe her. "I swear on my mother's grave I did not kill him. I just found the body." Ashton's blue eyes studied her intently, and for a moment something passed between them, an understanding that defied logic. He gave a slight nod. so subtle she almost missed it, then stepped back to let the deputy lead her into the jail. The Dodge City Jail was a sturdy brick building that smelled of stale coffee and unwashed bodies. Marshal Hendricks, who had made the arrest in Cimarron, was waiting inside. He was a hard-faced man in his 50s with graying hair and cold gray eyes that held no mercy. "Get her in a cell," he ordered Wilson. "Judge will be here by 8 o'clock. Trial is set for 9 tomorrow morning." "That is not enough time to prepare a defense," Josephine protested, fear making her voice shake. "I need a lawyer, I need witnesses, You need to accept your fate," Hendricks cut her off. "We have all the evidence we need. You were found standing over the body with his blood on your hands. The murder weapon has your fingerprints. You had motive and opportunity. This trial is just a formality." The cell door clanged shut with a terrible finality. Josephine sank onto the narrow cot, her mind reeling. This could not be happening. Just 4 days ago, she had been a respectable young woman running her family's small farm outside Cimarron. Her mother had died of influenza the previous winter, leaving Josephine alone at 22 years old with 50 acres of land, a small herd of cattle, and a mortgage she could barely afford. She had gone to the bank seeking an extension, hoping to buy herself time until she could sell her fall harvest. Whitmore had refused, had actually laughed at her, suggesting there were other ways a young woman might earn his favor. She had told him exactly what she thought of his suggestion, loud enough that half the bank had heard. 3 days later, he was dead, and she was facing the gallows. Josephine drew her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them in a futile attempt to stop shivering. The cell was dim and cold despite the afternoon heat. Through the small barred window high on the wall, she could see the sky beginning to take on the golden hue of late afternoon. Hours. She had mere hours before sunset, and after that, nothing but a mockery of a trial before her execution. The sound of raised voices in the outer office made her lift her head. She recognized Deputy Wilson's placating tone, and then that other voice, the deep one that had steadied her when she nearly fell. "I am telling you, something does not add up," Ashton was saying. "I knew Thomas Whitmore. I did business with him twice when I brought cattle through Cimarron. He was a snake, Marshal. Half the territory had reason to want him dead." "That may be," Hendricks replied coldly, "but only one person was found with the body. Now I suggest you move along, Mr. Ashton Cole." "This does not concern you." "Ashton Cole," Wilson said, his tone changing to one of respect. "The Ashton Cole who tracked down the Dalton gang last year." Josephine pressed closer to the bars, straining to hear. She knew that name. Everyone in Kansas knew that name. Ashton Cole had been a Texas Ranger before coming north, renowned for his ability to track anyone, anywhere, and for his unwavering sense of justice. He had single-handedly brought in 3 of the notorious Dalton brothers after they robbed a train outside Wichita, and he had done it without firing a single shot. "Same man," Ashton replied. "And I am telling you, Marshal, that girl did not commit murder. I saw her face. I have looked into the eyes of dozens of killers, and she is not one of them." "Your reputation does not give you authority here," Hendricks snapped. "The evidence speaks for itself." "Evidence can be planted," Ashton said quietly. "Evidence can lie. What cannot lie is human nature, and that woman is terrified because she is innocent, not because she got caught. Your opinion is noted and dismissed. Now get out of my jail." There was a long pause, and Josephine held her breath, hoping desperately that this stranger, this man who had no reason to believe her, would not give up so easily. "What time did the murder occur?" Ashton asked. "Around 11 o'clock yesterday morning," Wilson answered before Hendricks could stop him. Doc Harrison put the time of death between 10:30 and noon. And the girl was found at what time? 11:15, Wilson said. Bank clerk heard her scream and saw her standing over the body. 15 minutes, Ashton mused. Not much time to commit a murder, search a vault, and still be standing there screaming when someone arrives. Most killers run. They do not stick around to be caught. Unless she is stupid, Hendricks said. Or unless she wanted to be caught for some twisted reason. Either way, Cole, this is not your concern. Get out, or I will have Wilson escort you out. Heavy footsteps approached the cell area, and then Ashton appeared at the bars. His blue eyes found hers immediately, and Josephine stood on trembling legs, moving closer to him. "Tell me what happened," he said quietly. "Every detail, exactly as you remember it." Josephine gripped the cold iron bars, her hands just inches from his. "I went to the bank at about 11 o'clock to deposit my mother's jewelry. I wanted it in the vault for safekeeping. The main floor was empty, which I thought was strange, but the vault door was open, so I walked back thinking someone was there." She paused, the memory making her stomach turn. "I saw Mr. Whitmore on the floor. There was so much blood. I screamed and ran to him, thinking maybe I could help, but when I turned him over, the knife was there. I pulled it out without thinking, trying to save him, but he was already dead. His eyes were just staring at nothing." "Did you see anyone else? Hear anything unusual?" "The back door was open," Josephine said, the details suddenly flooding back. "I remember now. The door that leads to the alley behind the bank. It was standing wide open, and I remember thinking that was odd because Mr. Whitmore was always so careful about security. But I was so focused on him, on trying to help, that I did not think anything of it until later." Ashton nodded slowly, his mind clearly working through the details. "Who else knew you were going to the bank that morning?" "I told Sally Henderson, my neighbor, the night before. She was the one who convinced me to put the jewelry in the vault instead of keeping it at the farm. She said it was not safe to have valuables in a house where I lived alone." "Sally Henderson," Ashton repeated. "Anyone else?" Josephine shook her head. "Just Sally. I did not tell anyone else." "Cole," Hendricks barked from the doorway. "That is enough. Get out now, or I will lock you up for interfering with the law." Ashton held Josephine's gaze for a long moment. "I am going to prove you are innocent," he said, his voice low and intense. "I give you my word." "Why?" Josephine whispered. "You do not even know me." Something softened in his expression, a warmth that reached his eyes and made him look almost vulnerable. "Because I know injustice when I see it. And because something tells me you are worth saving." Before she could respond, Wilson was pulling Ashton away, ushering him toward the door. Josephine watched him go, hope blooming in her chest for the first time since this nightmare began. The sun was already sinking lower in the sky, painting long shadows across the cell floor. Josephine returned to her cot and tried to calm her racing heart. Ashton Cole believed her. More than that, he had promised to prove her innocence. But could one man, even one with his reputation, uncover the truth before nightfall? It seemed impossible, and yet she found herself clinging to that impossible hope. Outside the jail, Ashton stood on the wooden sidewalk, his mind racing through possibilities. He had about 4 hours until sunset, maybe less if he accounted for the time needed to bring evidence back to the marshal. 4 hours to investigate a murder, identify the real killer, and clear an innocent woman's name. He had faced worse odds, but never with so much at stake. There was something about Josephine Mitchell that had struck him the moment he caught her. It was not just her beauty, though she was lovely even in her distress, with her dark auburn hair and expressive hazel eyes. It was the terror and desperate honesty in her face, the way she had looked at him as if he were her last hope on earth. And maybe he was. Ashton's first stop was the telegraph office. He sent 3 urgent messages. One to the sheriff in Cimarron requesting background information on Thomas Whitmore and any known enemies. One to a friend who worked at the railroad asking about passenger arrivals and departures from Cimarron the day of the murder. And one to a fellow former ranger who owed him a favor, asking for any information about suspicious activity in the area. While waiting for responses, Ashton headed to the saloon across from the jail. The bartender, a portly man named Jack, knew everyone who passed through Dodge City. "Jack," Ashton said, leaning against the bar, "you hear anything about a killing in Cimarron yesterday?" Jack polished a glass and nodded. "Some banker named Whitmore. Word is they caught the killer red-handed, some farm girl." "What else did you hear about Whitmore?" Jack's eyes flickered with something, wariness perhaps. "Why you asking?" "Because I do not think that farm girl killed anyone," Ashton said bluntly. "And I think if I dig into Whitmore's business, I will find plenty of people who wanted him dead." The bartender glanced around, making sure no one was listening too closely. "Whitmore was not well liked," he said quietly. "Came through here about 2 months back. Got into a poker game with some of the local boys. There was talk that he cheated, took a lot of money off a man named Frank Davenport. Frank was spitting mad about it, made some threats. Frank Davenport's still in town." "Nah, he rode out a week ago." "But his brother Rick is still around. Works at the livery stable." Ashton bought Jack a drink as thanks and headed for the livery. The stable was a large structure at the edge of town, smelling of hay and horse sweat. He found Rick Davenport mucking out a stall, a lean man in his 30s with resentful eyes. "What do you want?" Rick asked when Ashton approached. "Information about Thomas Whitmore." Rick spat into the hay. "That cheat is dead and good riddance. Your brother had trouble with him." "My brother lost $200 to that card sharp," Rick said bitterly. "Money he had saved for 2 years. Whitmore knew he was cheating, we all knew it, but no one could prove it. Frank wanted to call him out, but Whitmore was too cowardly. He left town the next morning." "Where is your brother now?" "Texas, working on a ranch near Abilene. Has been there for 3 weeks." "Why?" "Just checking facts," Ashton said. "You know anyone else who had problems with Whitmore?" Rick leaned on his pitchfork, considering. "About half the people he did business with, I would guess. He was a banker who liked to foreclose on folks when they were down on their luck. Lots of people lost their land because of him." Ashton filed that information away and thanked Rick for his time. The sun was lower now, perhaps 3 hours until it touched the horizon. He needed to work faster. His next stop was the telegraph office, where he found responses waiting. The sheriff in Cimarron had sent a long list of complaints and accusations against Whitmore. Everything from predatory lending practices to accusations of impropriety with female customers. The railroad contact confirmed that several passengers had departed Cimarron on the noon train the day of the murder, but provided no names. The third telegram was the most interesting. Ashton's ranger friend had heard rumors of a confidence man working the Kansas territory, a man who specialized in befriending bankers and merchants, gaining their trust, and then robbing them. The description matched no one Ashton knew, but it was a lead worth pursuing. Ashton stood in the telegraph office, piecing together a theory. Whitmore was a dishonest man with many enemies. Someone had killed him, possibly robbed him, and left before Josephine arrived. The open back door suggested a quick escape through the alley. The question was, why had the real killer put the murder weapon in Josephine's hands? Or had he? Ashton closed his eyes, reimagining the scene as Josephine had described it. She had found the body, had instinctively tried to help by removing the knife. Her prints would have covered any others on the handle. The real killer might not have planted evidence at all. He might simply have been lucky that an innocent woman walked in moments after the murder and contaminated the crime scene. But that did not explain the blood on Josephine's dress. If she had just pulled the knife out, she would have gotten some blood on her hands, but her entire dress front had been stained. That suggested she had been closer to the body, had perhaps cradled Whitmore or tried to stop the bleeding. Ashton headed back towards Cimarron at a gallop. The town was only 8 miles from Dodge City, and he pushed his horse hard, arriving just after 5 o'clock. The bank was closed, sealed by Marshal Hendricks with a notice warning against trespassing. Ashton ignored it and picked the lock, slipping inside. The vault was at the back of the building, just as Josephine had described. Dark bloodstains marked the floor where Whitmore had fallen. Ashton studied the scene carefully, noting the position of the body based on the blood pattern. Whitmore had been facing the vault when he was stabbed, suggesting he knew his killer, or at least was not afraid of whoever came up behind him. The back door stood closed now, but Ashton opened it and examined the alley beyond. Boot prints in the dust, several sets, most too old and weathered to be useful. But there, near the door, a fresher print, smaller than average, a man's boot but not a large man. Ashton measured it with his hand, memorizing the pattern of wear on the heel. Inside the vault, several deposit boxes stood open. Ashton had no way of knowing what had been taken, but the disarray suggested the killer had been searching for something specific. Had he found it? Or had Josephine's arrival interrupted the theft? Ashton left the bank and crossed the dusty street to the boarding house where Sally Henderson lived. She answered his knock with a surprised expression, a plump woman in her 40s with kind eyes and flour on her apron. "Help you?" she asked. "I am investigating the murder of Thomas Whitmore," Ashton said, removing his hat politely. "I understand you are a friend of Josephine Mitchell." Sally's face crumpled with distress. "Oh, that poor girl. I cannot believe she would do such a thing. Josie would not hurt a fly." "I agree," Ashton said gently. "That is why I am trying to find out who really killed Whitmore. You told Josephine to take her jewelry to the bank." "I did," Sally admitted, wringing her hands. "I thought it would be safer there than at her farm. If I had known this would happen, I never would have suggested it. This is all my fault." "It is not your fault," Ashton assured her. "Did you tell anyone else that Josephine was planning to go to the bank?" Sally thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I mentioned it to my brother when he stopped by that evening. He was concerned about Josie being out there all alone, and I told him she was being smart about protecting her valuables." "Why? You do not think Marcus had anything to do with this?" "I am just gathering information." "What is your brother's full name?" "Marcus Henderson. He works as a clerk at the general store, but he would never hurt anyone, Mr. Cole, Ashton Cole. And I am not accusing anyone, madam. I just need to know who knew about Josephine's plans." Ashton thanked Sally and headed to the general store, his mind racing. The sun was getting dangerously low now, perhaps 2 hours until sunset. He was running out of time. Marcus Henderson was a thin, nervous man in his 30s with thinning hair and ink-stained fingers. He was closing up the store when Ashton arrived, and he jumped when Ashton called his name. "Can I help you?" Marcus asked, his voice high and anxious. "I am looking into Thomas Whitmore's murder. Your sister mentioned you knew Josephine Mitchell was planning to visit the bank yesterday morning." Something flickered in Marcus's eyes, fear perhaps. "So, lots of people go to the bank. That does not mean anything. Did you mention it to anyone else?" Marcus licked his lips nervously. "I might have. I do not remember. It was just casual conversation." "Who did you talk to, Marcus?" "I do not know. Maybe I mentioned it to some customers. I really cannot recall." Marcus was backing toward the door now, clearly eager to leave. Ashton stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "A woman is going to hang for a murder she did not commit, unless I find the truth. If you know something, anything, now is the time to tell me." Marcus was sweating now, despite the cooling evening air. "I do not know anything about any murder, There was a man. He came into the store that morning, asking questions about the town, about the bank. I might have mentioned that it would be quiet around 11 because Mr. Whitmore always sent his clerk to the post office at that time. But that is all. I just made conversation." What did this man look like? Ordinary. Brown hair, brown eyes, medium height. He wore a nice suit, like a traveling salesman. He said his name was Smith, I think, or maybe Jones. One of those common names. Ashton felt a surge of excitement. This matched the description of the confidence man his ranger friend had mentioned. "Did you notice anything else about him?" Any distinguishing features? Marcus thought hard. "He had small feet. I remember because he asked if we sold boots and I had to tell him we only carried larger sizes. He seemed annoyed about that. Small feet. Like the boot print in the alley behind the bank." "Where did this man go after he left your store?" "I do not know. I saw him walking toward the hotel, but that was the last I saw of him." Ashton thanked Marcus and raced to the hotel, a small establishment with peeling paint and a bored clerk at the desk. Yes, the clerk confirmed. A man matching that description had checked in 2 days before the murder. He had checked out around noon yesterday, claiming urgent business in Wichita. He had paid cash and left no forwarding address. "Did he give a name?" Ashton asked. The clerk consulted the register. "James Smith." "Did you notice anything unusual about him?" He kept to himself mostly. "Oh, but he did ask a lot of questions about the bank. Wanted to know when the busiest times were, who worked there, that sort of thing. I figured he was just a businessman planning to make a deposit." Ashton's pulse was racing now. He had found his killer, or at least a strong suspect. A confidence man who had likely befriended Whitmore, learned the bank's routine, and then murdered him during the theft. The man had probably been in the vault, searching the deposit boxes, when Whitmore returned unexpectedly. A struggle, a knife thrust, and then a panicked escape through the back door just minutes before Josephine arrived. But Ashton needed proof, solid evidence that would convince Marshal Hendricks and the judge. A description and a theory would not be enough to save Josephine. The sun was touching the tops of the western buildings now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Ashton had perhaps an hour until full sunset. He mounted his horse and rode hard back toward Dodge City, his mind working furiously. The confidence man had gone to Wichita. The afternoon train from Cimarron would have gotten him there by evening. If Ashton could find him, get him to confess, or at least tie him to the murder somehow, he could save Josephine. But Wichita was a full day's ride away. He would never make it before nightfall, unless he could prove the man's identity another way. Ashton detoured to the railroad station in Dodge City and found the station master locking up for the evening. "I need information about passengers traveling from Cimarron to Wichita yesterday," Ashton said urgently. The station master, an elderly man with spectacles, shook his head. "I do not have access to those records. You would need to wire Cimarron or Wichita to get passenger lists. How long would that take? A telegram might get a response tonight if anyone is still at the office. Might not." Ashton sent urgent telegrams to both stations, offering a reward for immediate information. Then he went back to the jail, where the shadows were growing long and purple in the fading light. Marshal Hendricks was at his desk, looking annoyed when Ashton walked in. "You again. I thought I told you to stay out of this." "I have evidence that Josephine Mitchell did not kill Thomas Whitmore," Ashton said, keeping his voice level and professional. There was a man in Cimarron the day of the murder, a confidence man matching the description of a wanted criminal. He checked into the hotel 2 days before the killing, asked suspicious questions about the bank's routine, and checked out around noon yesterday, right after the murder. Hendricks leaned back in his chair, his expression skeptical. That is all circumstantial. It does not prove anything. The boot print in the alley behind the bank matches the description of this man's footwear. Small size, unusual wear pattern. Marcus Henderson at the general store confirms the man asked questions about the bank schedule. The hotel clerk confirms he was overly interested in the bank's operations. Still circumstantial, Hendricks insisted. You have no physical evidence, no witness who actually saw this man commit the crime. For all I know, you are making this entire story up to save a pretty girl. Ashton's hands clenched into fists, but he kept his voice calm. Give me until sunset. I have telegrams out trying to confirm this man's identity and track his movements. If I can prove he was there, if I can connect him to the murder, will you at least delay the trial? Hendricks studied him for a long moment, then shook his head. The judge arrives tonight. The trial proceeds tomorrow morning as scheduled. If you want to present this information to the judge, you are welcome to do so, but I am not delaying anything based on your speculation. Ashton wanted to argue further, but he knew it would be pointless. Hendricks had already made up his mind about Josephine's guilt. Instead, Ashton walked back to the cell area, where Josephine stood gripping the bars, her face pale and drawn. I heard what you told him, she said quietly. Thank you for trying. Ashton moved close to the bars, his hands covering hers. Her fingers were ice cold despite the lingering warmth of the day. I am not done yet, he promised. I have telegrams out. If I can get confirmation before sunset, I can take it to the judge tonight and demand they investigate further. The sun is almost down, Josephine whispered, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Even if you prove this man exists, how will you prove he killed Mr. Whitmore? Because men like him always make mistakes, Ashton said firmly. They get cocky, leave trails, trust the wrong people. I will find his mistake. Josephine's fingers tightened around his. Why are you doing this? You could walk away right now. This is not your fight. Ashton looked into her hazel eyes, seeing the fear and vulnerability there, but also the strength. This woman had lost her mother, had fought to keep her farm alone, had faced false accusations with dignity. She deserved better than the hand fate had dealt her. I cannot walk away, he said softly. I knew the moment I caught you that I could not let you face this alone. I do not know how to explain it, Josephine, but something in me knows you are worth fighting for. A tear slipped down her cheek, and Ashton reached through the bars to gently brush it away. His thumb lingered on her face, and he felt her lean into his touch. The moment was interrupted by the sound of hurried footsteps. Deputy Wilson appeared, slightly out of breath, holding a telegram. Cole, this just came for you, from the railroad. Ashton snatched the paper and read quickly, his heart pounding. The telegram was from the station master in Cimarron. A man matching the description of James Smith had purchased a ticket to Wichita on the noon train yesterday. The ticket seller remembered him because he had been in a visible hurry and had paid with a large number of small bills, as if he had just collected money from multiple sources, or robbed a bank vault full of various deposits. This proves he left town right after the murder, Ashton said, showing the telegram to Josephine and Wilson. He ran because he was guilty. It proves he left town, Wilson agreed, reading the telegram, but it does not prove he killed anyone. Lots of people leave town in a hurry. Ashton wanted to scream with frustration. The sun was minutes from setting, the sky now deep purple with just a sliver of gold on the horizon. He needed something more, something concrete that would force even Hendricks to acknowledge the truth. Then inspiration struck. "The deposit boxes," Ashton said suddenly. "In the bank vault. They were open, rifled through. If we can determine what was taken, if we can prove that Josephine's mother's jewelry was not the only thing targeted, it would establish that robbery was the motive, not revenge." "The bank records would show what was in each box," Wilson said thoughtfully. "But they are back in Cimarron, and Hendricks sealed the bank." "I already broke that seal once today," Ashton admitted. "I can do it again. But I need someone official with me, someone who can testify that the evidence was properly collected." Wilson hesitated, glancing toward the marshal's office. Hendricks would be furious if he helped Ashton, but the deputy was clearly torn. Finally, he sighed and grabbed his coat. "I must be crazy, but something about this whole thing has not sat right with me from the start. Let us go, but we have to be quick." They rode hard for Cimarron, pushing their horses to the limit. The sun had just touched the horizon when they reached the bank. Ashton picked the lock again while Wilson kept watch, and they slipped inside. In Whitmore's office, they found the ledger containing records of the deposit boxes. Ashton ran his finger down the entries, noting which boxes had been opened. There were 5 in total. Box 3 had contained Josephine's mother's jewelry, which was still there, untouched. Box 7 had contained $200 in cash belonging to Frank Davenport, now empty. Box 12 had contained gold coins worth approximately $500, also empty. Box 15 had contained property deeds and legal documents, rifled but apparently nothing taken. Box 20 had contained stock certificates worth nearly $1,000, also gone. "He took everything liquid," Ashton said, excitement building. "Cash, gold, stocks. Things he could quickly convert. He left the jewelry because it would be too identifiable, too risky defense." Wilson was examining the vault more closely. He bent down and picked up something small and metallic. "Cole, look at this." It was a cufflink, silver with a distinctive monogram. "The initials were J.S., James Smith," Ashton breathed. "Or whoever he really is. This must have fallen off during the struggle with Whitmore." "This is evidence," Wilson said, holding the cufflink up to the fading light. "Real, physical evidence that someone else was in that vault. Between this and the telegram, we might actually have enough to create reasonable doubt." They carefully documented everything they found, Wilson taking notes in his official capacity as a deputy. Then they locked the bank and rode back to Dodge City at breakneck speed, racing the dying light. The sun was just disappearing below the horizon when they burst into the marshal's office. Hendricks looked up from his dinner, irritation clear on his face. "What in blazes? We have evidence," Ashton announced, slamming the ledger and the cufflink down on the desk. "Proof that Thomas Whitmore was robbed by someone other than Josephine Mitchell. Proof that a man matching the description of a known confidence man was in that vault, left physical evidence behind, and fled town immediately after the murder." Wilson corroborated everything, adding his official testimony as a witness. Hendricks examined the cufflink, read the ledger entries, and reviewed the telegram with growing reluctance. Finally, he sat back and rubbed his weathered face. "This is not proof of innocence," he said, but his voice lacked its earlier certainty. "It is proof that there was a robbery and that someone else might have been involved. But it does not definitively prove the girl did not do it. She could have been working with this Smith fellow." "She had never met him," Ashton argued. "She can account for her whereabouts every minute of the day before the murder. She had no contact with this man." "That you know of," Hendricks countered. "Marshal," Wilson said quietly, "I think we need to investigate this further before we proceed with the execution. There is enough doubt here to warrant at least a delay." Hendricks stared at the evidence for a long moment, clearly torn between his conviction that he had caught the killer and the undeniable questions this new information raised. Finally, he stood and walked back to the cells. Josephine was sitting on her cot, her face pale in the lamplight. She looked up when Hendricks appeared, and Ashton saw her brace herself for bad news. "Miss Mitchell," Hendricks said gruffly, "it appears there may be more to your story than I initially credited. I am not saying you are innocent, but there is enough new evidence to warrant further investigation. I am going to recommend to Judge Carrington that we postpone your trial pending a more thorough examination of the facts." Josephine's legs seemed to give out, and she sat down hard on the cot. "You mean I am not going to hang?" "Not tomorrow, anyway," Hendricks said. "But you will remain in custody until this is resolved. If we cannot locate this James Smith or whoever he is, you may still face trial." Ashton felt relief flood through him, so powerful it made him slightly dizzy. He had done it. He had proven her innocence, or at least created enough doubt to save her life. The sun had set, but he had beaten the deadline. Hendricks left to send word to Judge Carrington, and Wilson discreetly gave Ashton a few minutes alone with Josephine. Ashton approached the cell and Josephine stood, moving to the bars. Her eyes were bright with tears, but she was smiling. "You did it," she whispered. "You actually did it." "I told you I would," Ashton replied, his own voice rough with emotion. He reached through the bars and cupped her face gently. "I could not let them hurt you." Josephine covered his hand with hers, turning her face to press a kiss to his palm. The gesture was so intimate, so trusting, that Ashton felt something shift in his chest. This was not just about justice anymore, had not been from the moment he first looked into her eyes. This was about a woman who had touched something deep in his soul, who had made him feel things he had never expected to feel. "When this is over," he said softly, "when you are free and your name is cleared, I want to know you better. I want to learn everything about you, Josephine Mitchell." "I would like that," she whispered, her hazel eyes locked on his. "I would like that very much." Over the next 3 days, Ashton worked tirelessly to track down James Smith. With the help of his contacts and the cooperation of law enforcement across Kansas, they discovered that Smith was actually James Sutton, a notorious confidence man wanted in 3 states for fraud, theft, and now murder. Ashton traced him to Wichita, where Sutton had attempted to cash the stolen stock certificates. The bank had grown suspicious and contacted the authorities. Sutton had fled, but Ashton tracked him to a boarding house in Lawrence, where he arrested him without incident. Under interrogation, Sutton confessed. He had befriended Whitmore in a poker game weeks earlier, had learned about the valuable deposits in the bank vault, and had returned to rob it. Whitmore had surprised him in the act, and Sutton had panicked and stabbed him. He had taken what he could carry and fled through the back door, never knowing that an innocent woman would walk in moments later and be blamed for his crime. When Ashton brought Sutton back to Dodge City in chains, Josephine was finally released. She walked out of that jail into the bright afternoon sunlight, and Ashton was waiting for her. She ran to him, and he caught her in his arms, holding her close as she cried tears of relief and joy. "It is over," he murmured into her hair. "You are free. Your name is cleared." Josephine pulled back just enough to look up at him, her face radiant despite the tears. "Thanks to you. You saved my life, Ashton Cole." "You gave me a reason to," he replied, and then he kissed her. It was gentle and tender, a promise of more to come. In the weeks that followed, Ashton helped Josephine return to her farm. The harvest was late, but with his help and the assistance of neighbors who felt terrible about doubting her, they brought in the crops. The mortgage was paid, and Josephine was able to keep her mother's land. Ashton found himself spending more and more time at that little farm outside Cimarron. He would arrive in the morning to help with chores, stay for dinner that Josephine cooked with increasing confidence, and linger long into the evening, talking with her on the porch as the stars came out. They talked about everything, their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Josephine learned that Ashton had left the Rangers after seeing too much violence, too many good people destroyed by lawlessness. He wanted something more, something peaceful, but he had not known what until he met her. "I think I have been searching for a place to belong," he admitted one evening as they sat together on the porch swing. "For someone to belong to." Josephine took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "You belong here," she said simply. "With me, if you want to." Ashton turned to her, his blue eyes intense in the lamplight spilling from the windows. "Are you sure? I am not an easy man, Josephine. I have enemies. I have a past that follows me sometimes." "I am sure," she said firmly. "You are the best man I have ever known, Ashton. You believed in me when no one else did. You risked everything to save me. How could I not want you in my life?" He kissed her then, slow and deep, pouring everything he felt into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Ashton rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he whispered. "I think I have loved you from the moment I caught you falling from that prison wagon." "I love you too," Josephine replied, her voice trembling with emotion. "I did not think I would ever feel this way about anyone, but you make me feel safe. You make me feel seen." They were married in early December, a small ceremony in the Cimarron Church with Sally Henderson and Deputy Wilson as witnesses. Josephine wore a simple white dress, and Ashton wore his best suit, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the small congregation cheered. The newlyweds moved into Josephine's farmhouse, which now became their home. Ashton sold his horse and most of his traveling gear, keeping only his rifle and his reputation. He occasionally took work as a tracker or investigator when the money was needed, but mostly he focused on building a life with his wife. They worked the farm together, planting and harvesting, raising cattle and chickens, creating something stable and lasting. Their first child, a son they named Andrew Marcus Cole, was born in August of the following year. Ashton held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face, marveling at the tiny perfect human he and Josephine had created together. Josephine watched her husband cradle their baby and felt her heart swell with so much love she thought it might burst. "He is perfect," Ashton whispered, gently touching the baby's soft cheek. "He is ours," Josephine replied, reaching up to touch Ashton's face. "Our family." 2 years later, they had a daughter, Sarah Jane, who had her mother's hazel eyes and her father's determination. Andrew was a protective older brother, always watching over his little sister with the same fierce devotion his father showed his mother. Ashton proved to be a wonderful father, patient and loving. He taught Andrew to ride almost as soon as the boy could walk, and he sang lullabies to Sarah in his deep, slightly off-key voice that made Josephine smile every time she heard it. On warm summer evenings, the family would sit on the porch together, watching the sun set over the prairie, and Josephine would think about how close she had come to losing all of this. "What are you thinking about?" Ashton asked one such evening, noticing the faraway look in her eyes. Andrew was playing with his toy horses at their feet, and Sarah was asleep in her mother's arms. "About that day in the prison wagon," Josephine admitted. "How terrified I was, how certain I was that my life was over." Ashton set down the piece of wood he had been whittling and moved closer, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "That was not the end," he said softly. "That was the beginning." "I know," Josephine said, leaning into him. "That was the day I met you, the day my life truly started." "Mine too," Ashton replied, kissing the top of her head. "I was just drifting before you, Moving from town to town, job to job, never putting down roots. You gave me a reason to stop running. You gave me a home." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to deep purple. Andrew abandoned his toys and climbed into his father's lap, and Ashton gathered his son close, one arm around his wife, holding everything he loved most in the world. Years passed in steady contentment. The farm prospered under their joint care. Ashton's reputation continued to bring occasional work, usually tracking lost persons or stolen property, but he was always home within a few days, unwilling to be away from his family for long. Josephine became known throughout the county for her kindness and her strength, often taking in neighbors who had fallen on hard times and helping however she could. Sally Henderson remained a close friend, frequently visiting to dote on Andrew and Sarah. Deputy Wilson, who had been promoted to marshal after Hendricks retired, would stop by occasionally to share coffee and conversation, always prefacing his visits with, "This is not official business, just friendly." When Andrew was 10 and Sarah was 8, Josephine discovered she was pregnant again. This time they had twins, 2 boys they named Daniel and Thomas. The farmhouse, which had once seemed so empty and lonely, now rang with the sounds of children laughing and playing. Ashton built an addition onto the house, expanding it to accommodate their growing family. On quiet nights when the children were finally asleep and the house was peaceful, Ashton and Josephine would sit together in the parlor. Josephine would work on her sewing while Ashton read or worked on his ledgers, and they would simply enjoy each other's presence. Sometimes they would talk about their day, about the children, about plans for the farm. Other times they would sit in companionable silence, needing no words to communicate their love and contentment. "You ever miss the excitement?" Josephine asked one evening, setting aside her mending. "The tracking, the adventure." Ashton looked up from his book and smiled. "Not for a second. This is the adventure I always wanted, I just did not know it. Watching our children grow, building this life with you, that is more fulfilling than anything I did before." "Even when the twins get into the feed shed and cover themselves in molasses?" Josephine asked with a laugh, remembering that afternoon's chaos. "Even then," Ashton confirmed, chuckling. "Especially then. Those are the moments that matter, Josie. The messy, chaotic, beautiful moments that make up a real life." Josephine moved to sit beside him on the settee, and he immediately put his arm around her, drawing her close. "I am grateful every day," she said softly. "Grateful that you saw me that day, that you believed in me, that you fought for me." "I am grateful you gave me a chance," Ashton replied. "Grateful you let a wandering cowboy into your heart and your life." They kissed, a gentle, familiar kiss that held all the love and trust they had built over the years. When they finally drew apart, Josephine rested her head on Ashton's shoulder, and he held her close, both of them savoring the peace they had found together. As the children grew older, Andrew showed an interest in ranching and began helping his father with the more demanding work. He was strong and capable, with his father's steady demeanor and his mother's compassion. Sarah was quieter, more studious, spending hours reading and helping her mother with correspondence. The twins were whirlwinds of energy, always into something, keeping everyone on their toes. Ashton taught all his children to ride, to shoot, to track, passing down the skills that had served him so well. But more importantly, he taught them about honor, about standing up for what was right, about protecting those who could not protect themselves. He told them the story of how he met their mother, how she had been falsely accused, and how he had fought to prove her innocence. "The most important thing," he would tell them, "is to never assume guilt. Always look deeper, always search for the truth, always give people the benefit of the doubt." "Is that why you became a tracker?" Andrew asked once. "In part," Ashton admitted. "But mostly I became a tracker because I wanted to bring justice to people who deserved it. And then I met your mother, and I learned that justice is not just about punishing the guilty. It is also about protecting the innocent." Josephine listened to these conversations with pride, watching her husband shape their children into good, thoughtful people. She had long ago stopped having nightmares about that terrible day in the prison wagon, about the fear and helplessness she had felt. Those memories had been replaced by happier ones. Ashton's face when he first held their son, the laughter of children playing in the yard, quiet evenings on the porch watching the sunset. When Josephine turned 40, Ashton organized a surprise party with the help of their children and neighbors. Nearly the entire county turned out to celebrate, filling the farmyard with music and laughter and good food. As Josephine stood on the porch, looking out at the sea of smiling faces, at her grown and growing children, at her husband who was watching her with such love in his eyes, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "Happy birthday," Ashton said, coming to stand beside her. He handed her a small, wrapped package. Josephine opened it to find a beautiful locket on a delicate chain. Inside were tiny photographs of each of their children and one of Ashton. "It is beautiful," she breathed. "Not as beautiful as you," Ashton said, fastening the locket around her neck. "Not as beautiful as the life you have given me." Josephine turned to face him, cupping his face in her hands. He was older now, lines at the corners of his eyes, silver threading through his dark hair, but to her he was more handsome than ever. "We gave each other this life," she corrected. "We built it together." "Together," Ashton agreed, kissing her softly. "Always together." The years continued to pass in peaceful succession. Andrew married a neighboring rancher's daughter and built a house on the far corner of the property, helping to work the expanding Cole ranch. Sarah became a teacher in Cimarron, educating the next generation of Kansas children. The twins eventually went into business together, opening a general store in Dodge City that quickly became successful. Through it all, Ashton and Josephine remained the center of their growing family. They became grandparents multiple times over, delighting in the next generation. Their home was always full of visitors, of children and grandchildren seeking advice or help or just company. Josephine ran a household that was warm and welcoming, while Ashton continued to be respected throughout the county for his wisdom and integrity. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren organized a celebration even bigger than Josephine's 40th birthday party. The farmyard was decorated with ribbons and flowers, tables groaned under the weight of food, and a band played music for dancing. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Andrew called for everyone's attention. 30 years ago, Andrew said, his voice carrying across the quiet crowd, my father saw a woman in trouble and decided to help her. He did not know her, he had no obligation to her, but something in him recognized that she needed someone to believe in her. He spent that entire day tracking down evidence, interviewing witnesses, piecing together the truth. He worked right up until sunset to prove her innocence. The crowd murmured appreciatively, many of them hearing the full story for the first time. What my father did not realize that day, Andrew continued, smiling at his parents, was that he was not just saving a woman's life. He was finding his own future. He was finding love, finding home, finding everything that would make his life complete. And in doing so, he gave all of us our lives too. Josephine was crying openly now, and Ashton squeezed her hand, his own eyes suspiciously bright. So we want to thank you both, Sarah added, standing beside her brother. for fighting for each other, for building this family, for showing us what real love looks like. Happy anniversary, Mama and Papa." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Ashton stood and pulled Josephine to her feet, drawing her into his arms. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Cole?" "Always, Mr. Cole," Josephine replied, smiling through her tears. As they swayed together to the music, surrounded by their children and grandchildren and friends, Josephine thought back to that terrified young woman in the prison wagon. If someone had told her then that her darkest moment would lead to such joy, such love, such a full and beautiful life, she never would have believed it. But here she was, held safely in the arms of the man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. "What are you thinking?" Ashton murmured, his lips close to her ear. "That I would do it all again," Josephine replied. "Every frightening moment, every terrible hour, if it meant ending up here with you." "You will never face anything like that again," Ashton promised fiercely. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you are safe and happy." "You already have," Josephine said, pulling back to look into his blue eyes, still as striking as they had been the day they met. "You have given me more happiness than I ever dreamed possible." They kissed, not caring that they were in the middle of a crowd, not caring that their grandchildren were giggling and their adult children were smiling indulgently. They kissed like the young couple they had once been, full of passion and promise, but also with the deep, abiding love that came from 3 decades of marriage. As the sun finally disappeared below the horizon, painting the sky in twilight purples and blues, the celebration continued. Music played, children danced, food was eaten, and stories were told. But Ashton and Josephine stayed in each other's arms, swaying gently, content to simply be together. 30 more years?" Ashton asked softly. "At least," Josephine replied. "At least 30 more." And they both knew they meant it. Whatever challenges the future might bring, whatever joys or sorrows lay ahead, they would face it together, just as they had faced everything since that fateful day when a cowboy proved an innocent woman's freedom before nightfall, and in doing so, found his own salvation. The celebration continued late into the night, but eventually the guests began to depart, until only the immediate family remained. They sat together around a bonfire, sharing memories and laughter, the grandchildren slowly falling asleep in various laps. Josephine looked around at all the faces illuminated by firelight, faces she loved more than anything in the world, and felt such profound contentment that it brought fresh tears to her eyes. Ashton noticed and pulled her closer. "Happy tears?" he asked quietly. "The happiest," Josephine confirmed. "I am just overwhelmed by how blessed we are, how blessed I am to have you." "The blessing is mine," Ashton insisted. "You gave me everything, Josie, everything that matters." As the fire burned down to embers and the last grandchild was carried off to bed, Ashton and Josephine remained, sitting together under the vast Kansas sky. The same stars that had looked down on them that desperate evening 30 years ago now witnessed their enduring love. They had built something remarkable together, not just a marriage or a family, but a legacy of love and justice and unwavering faith in each other. "You remember what you said to me that first night?" Josephine asked, her head resting on Ashton's shoulder. "When you promised to prove my innocence, I said I gave you my word," Ashton recalled. "I said you were worth saving." "You said something else too," Josephine reminded him. "You said something told you I was worth saving." Ashton was quiet for a moment, remembering that instant connection, that inexplicable pull he had felt toward a frightened woman in chains. "It was my heart," he said finally. "My heart knew you were meant to be mine, even if my head had not figured it out yet." "My heart knew too," Josephine admitted. Even in the middle of all that fear and desperation, when you looked at me, when you said you would help me, something in me recognized you, recognized that you were the one I had been waiting for." They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, until the fire was nothing but glowing coals, and the night air grew cool. Finally, they stood and walked hand in hand back to the house, to the bedroom they had shared for 30 years, to the life they had built together brick by brick, moment by moment, choice by choice. As Josephine settled into bed, Ashton beside her, she thought about the miracle of their love. How a single day, a single decision to believe in a stranger had changed everything. How the worst day of her life had led to the best life she could have imagined. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I will love you forever, Ashton Cole." "And I love you," Ashton replied, pulling her close. "Forever and beyond, Josephine Cole." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, just as they had fallen asleep every night for 3 decades, secure in the knowledge that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. The prison wagon was a distant memory now, replaced by a lifetime of love, laughter, and joy. The cowboy who had proven her innocence before nightfall had become the husband who proved his love every single day. And the frightened young woman who had thought her life was ending had discovered instead that it was just beginning with a man who saw past accusations and evidence to the truth beneath. A man who fought for justice and stayed for love. Their story had started with chains and fear and a desperate race against the setting sun. It had become something beautiful, something lasting, something that would echo through generations. Their children would tell their children, who would tell their children, about the day a cowboy saved a woman from the gallows and found his true home in the process. It would become family legend, a story of courage and faith and the kind of love that changes everything. But for Ashton and Josephine, it was simply their life, the life they had chosen, the life they had built, the life they would live together until their last breath and beyond. And as they slept, peaceful and content, the Kansas stars kept their watch, bearing witness to a love that had conquered injustice, overcome fear, and proved that sometimes the darkest moments lead to the brightest futures if only you are brave enough to believe, to fight, and to love.